Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the Justice Department is charging 3 Chinese scholars working at a University of Michigan lab. Details on their alleged smuggling of biological materials related to roundworms. China is introducing new export controls on some key metals set for next year. We'll take a closer look at how that could impact global supply chains. China's reach is growing in suppressing unfavorable media outlets, even when they're based in the U.S. One of our NTD reporters and another from our sister outlet, the Epoch Times, were recently denied access to key summit events in Asia. And is CCP leader Xi Jinping still in control of his party, or is he losing his grip? And what are the consequences of China's murderous one-child policies on its economy today? Stephen Mosher joins NTD's Steve Lance to discuss. Before we dive into today's news, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter using the link down below. It drops Friday morning straight to your inbox. Don't miss it. More charges for Chinese researchers at the University of Michigan. The Justice Department charged 3 Chinese research scholars on Wednesday. They're accused of smuggling biological materials into the U.S. and making false statements to CBP officers. All 3 have been arrested and are now in federal custody. According to the indictment, 2 of them received multiple shipments of roundworm biomaterials from China last year. In a statement, Attorney General Pam Bondi said allegedly attempting to smuggle biological materials under the guise of research is a serious crime. It threatens America's national and agricultural security. These shipments were sent by a Chinese PhD student called Chen Shen-Han and was sent to work at a University of Michigan lab this year, but was stopped by CBP officers at the airport. She lied to officers about packages she had previously sent over. U.S. authorities sentenced her to 3 months in jail for smuggling biological materials into the country. Han has since returned to China and has been barred from re-entering the U.S. 2 of the recently charged Chinese scholars said they received packages from Han after she left the U.S. In a separate case, another University of Michigan researcher has been charged with conspiring with her boyfriend to bring a toxic fungus into the U.S. Her case is currently pending. China is introducing new potential choke points in U.S. supply chains by tightening its grip on key materials. Following recent U.S.-China trade talks in South Korea, China's Commerce Ministry announced new export controls on tungsten, antimony, and silver. These critical materials are needed for advanced manufacturing in the U.S. Tungsten and antimony are key for weapon systems, cars, and semiconductors. Major chip makers like TSMC and NVIDIA rely on tungsten for their chip production. Meanwhile, silver is vital for 5G equipment and medical devices. This means Beijing's latest move could squeeze yet another critical link in the U.S. supply chain. The new rules lay out requirements for domestic manufacturers and traders applying for export licenses. They also detail the process to ensure only qualified and responsible companies are approved. These rules are set to take effect between 2026 and 2027. Beijing says the move is about protecting resources and the environment. But rare earth refining, which China dominates, is also one of the most polluting industries. According to Harvard International Review, China's dominance in the rare earth industry stems largely from weak environmental regulations. That's what allowed cheaper, high-pollution methods to outpace global competitors. The new export limits show how Beijing is using its grip on critical materials and how that exposes risks across global supply chains. The European Union is opening a special channel with China to keep rare earth materials flowing to EU industries. That's according to the EU Trade Commissioner Wednesday. The move comes after China introduced export controls on rare earths earlier this year. It's been raising concerns about potential disruptions to electric vehicle supply chains and other technologies that rely on these materials. Through the new channel, Brussels and Beijing will give European companies priority and cooperate to speed up export permits. The Supreme Court heard arguments Wednesday on President Trump's tariffs. Speculation is growing that they could be struck down, but the Trump administration remains optimistic.
U.S. Supreme Court justices raised doubts Wednesday over the legality of President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. Conservative and liberal justices alike sharply questioned U.S. Solicitor General B. John Sauer, who defended the legal rationale employed to impose the tariffs. Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law that lets a president regulate commerce in a national emergency. Conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett questioned Sauer's claim that IEEPA's language granting presidents emergency power to regulate importation encompasses tariffs.
Can you point to any other place in the code or any other time in history where that phrase, together, regulate importation, has been used to confer tariff-imposing authority?
Liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said IEEPA was intended to limit presidential authority, not expand it.
It's pretty clear that Congress was trying to constrain the emergency powers of the president in IEEPA, so it seems a little inconsistent to say that we have to interpret a statute that was designed to constrain presidential authority, consistent with an understanding that Congress wanted the president to have essentially unlimited authority.
Conservative Chief Justice John Roberts asked Sauer whether Trump has intruded onto the authority delegated to Congress in the Constitution.
Well, it's two-facing. Yes, of course, tariffs and dealings with foreign powers, but the vehicle is imposition of taxes on Americans, and that has always been the core power of Congress.
Roberts suggested that the court could apply its major questions doctrine that requires executive branch actions of vast economic and political significance to be clearly authorized by Congress. The arguments came in appeals by the administration after lower courts ruled Trump's unprecedented use of the law to impose tariffs exceeded his authority. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he thinks the administration is winning the argument.
I think it went very well. I think the Solicitor General made a very powerful case for the need for the president to have the IEEPA powers, and I believe that the other side, in a way, fell flat on their face, but that'll be up to SCOTUS.
The Supreme Court typically takes months to issue rulings after hearing arguments, but the Trump administration has asked it to act swiftly in this case.
Here's President Trump commenting on the case on Fox News Wednesday. Watch.
Well, I heard the court case went well today, but it'd be devastating for our country if we lost that. You know, that wasn't a threat against us. That was a threat against the entire world. I did this for the world. And I can guarantee you this. If I didn't put 100% tariff immediately on China, the entire world would be closed up.
Every camera, every iPhone here would have been subject to a Chinese control. Because he had the ability to threaten 100% tariff, he was able to successfully execute on foreign policy.
If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, it wouldn't be the end for President Trump. He's widely expected to shift towards other trade tactics to pressure foreign countries for money. New concerns about China's reach in suppressing unfavorable media coverage. The Epoch Times and NTD, two American media companies known for exposing human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party, were recently denied access to key Asia Summit events. NTD's Dana Monahan has more on the incident, which happened at the recent ASEAN and APEC summits.
An Epoch Times reporter traveling with the White House encountered repeated roadblocks in accessing key press events in Asia, the latest in a pattern of interference linked to communist authorities in Beijing. Epoch Times is NTD's sister media. Both companies were ultimately denied entry to the ASEAN and APEC summits. They were the only outlets denied access despite having received pre-approved press credentials. This occurred after a series of twists and turns involving communications discrepancies, unlikely tech glitches, failed promises of press credentials, sudden reversal of statements, and passing the buck. Epoch Times editor-in-chief Jasper Fokkert said in a statement, "The Chinese Communist Party is an enemy to freedom of the press." He called it deeply concerning that the regime could influence international bodies like the United Nations and ASEAN to block access for what is now America's fourth largest newspaper. Headquartered in New York, the Epoch Times has long been a target of the Chinese regime, from threats and intimidation of advertisers to physical obstruction of reporters. In 2000, its first journalists in China were arrested, with several sentenced to a decade in prison. More recently, UN officials barred its reporters from entry in September. The campaign has intensified. Hackers impersonating Epoch Times staff have threatened U.S. agencies. The paper has received bomb threats, and an envelope containing white powder arrived at its headquarters in October. Travis Gilmore, White House correspondent for the Epoch Times, arrived in Malaysia 2 days before President Trump joined the ASEAN summit. Gilmore had pre-approved media credentials. However, when embassy and White House staff went to retrieve the credentials for media personnel, ASEAN officials informed them that Gilmore's profile needed updating. Repeatedly, Gilmore said he found himself in the same cycle, being told to come back and pick up the press pass later, only to find nothing when he returned. On October 26th, the ASEAN staff told Gilmore he got a pass approval, but the credentials never materialized. Mariotsu and Chen Lei, White House correspondent and videographer for NTD, faced a similar situation when they arrived at their hotel in South Korea ahead of the APEC summit. Inside the hotel, a reserved media table at the press filing center bore the NTD logo, but APEC staff members restricted their access and stated they didn't have the pair's credentials. The media liaison team blamed a mix-up for what happened and told Otsu they had found her media pass, only to walk back the statement within minutes, saying the earlier message was sent in error. Neither APEC nor ASEAN returned the Epoch Times request for comment on the article about the incidents. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Fiji's UN representative visited Taipei this week, meeting with Taiwan's vice president. In a rare diplomatic move on Thursday, China said the visit severely violates the Pacific Island nation's commitment to the One China principle, given that Fiji maintains formal ties with Beijing. In July, Fiji's prime minister said his country was opposed to China's plan to set up a military base in the Pacific Islands. And back in 2023, he publicly expressed a positive attitude toward relations with Taiwan, including the possibility of restoring or strengthening informal ties. Strategically placed between the U.S. and Asia, the Pacific Islands are a focal point of rivalry between Washington and Beijing over security ties. Coming up, is CCP leader Xi Jinping still in control of his party, or is he losing his grip? And what are the consequences of China's murderous one-child policies on its economy today? Stephen Mosher joins NTD's Steve Lance to discuss. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China experts are debating on Chinese leader Xi Jinping's standing within the regime. What is the future of the Chinese Communist Party and its failing economy? To discuss it, NTD's Steve Lance was joined by Stephen Mosher, an author and leading China scholar. About 50 years ago, Mosher became the first American scholar to study a communist Chinese commune up close. His access to China came through a request from then-President Jimmy Carter.
There's a discussion among scholars, China watchers, China scholars, or a debate whether or not the dictator, Xi Jinping, is in complete and total control, or if he's paranoid about losing control. What do you think is the state of politics inside of China?
What we have in China today is an economy that's faltering. It's faltering. Why? It's faltering for three reasons. One, because of the demographic decline. Those hundreds of millions of young people who should be getting married and buying homes and cars aren't there. So there's 70 million empty apartment buildings in China which will not be occupied ever, because the people who would have occupied them and raised families are gone forever. The second thing is, of course, all the misdirected government investment into white elephants, the state-owned enterprises that continue to lose money each year, like China Rail, for example, which is hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. That debt will never be paid off. And then you've got the tariff pressure, the pressure from the tariffs of Donald Trump. The only sector of the Chinese economy that actually works according to market principles is the export sector. And the export sector only works because of access to the American market. And they've got nothing else. They've got no domestic consumption, in part because of the one-child policy, in part because nobody in China trusts the government. They want to hold on to their capital or get it out of the country as quickly as possible and buy a safe investment like a home in California or a home in Sydney. The Chinese economy is in for some very, very dark days ahead. And I believe that the sooner the collapse comes, the sooner Xi Jinping will be forced, as Mao was, to either step back to what he called the second line or to be forced out of power altogether. He's alienated all of the other factions in China. He's alienated the followers of Jiang Zemin by purging members of his faction. He's alienated Hu Jintao's faction. In fact, he had Hu removed for health reasons from a meeting in front of the assembled senior leaders. That was tremendous loss of face for Hu Jintao, tremendous. So he's alienated the factions in the Communist Party, leaving only his own, he wanted to leave only his own faction standing, and yet recently members of his own faction, generals that he's appointed, have been removed. That makes no sense. It makes no sense for Xi Jinping himself, who has only the support of his faction, to begin removing members of that faction.
I want to revisit something that you mentioned when it came to your research and your time in China, where it came to a head and basically an ultimatum was given. Is that something that is still prominent, whether it be in media, if you have a bureau, if you're a Western media organization inside of China, as well as China scholars that really enjoy the access, whether it is a junket or some type of research that they want to do in China where you have to toe a certain line? Is there a concern that we've been contaminated as a society?
Well, I've been concerned about this for a very, very long time because we have in the United States an open society. And we also, because of our Judeo-Christian heritage, I think always try to assume the best of people. That operating principle doesn't work very well with regard to China, because one has to assume that the communist official that you're dealing with is being duplicitous unless you have evidence that he's being honest. In order to be on good terms with the Chinese Communist Party, you have to play nice. You have to say nice things about them. And if you do, you get invited on all expense paid junkets to China. You get visa, of course. First foremost, you get a visa to go to China, and then you get an all expense paid trip to China. You would think that if they were to give up on anyone, they would give up on me, because I've been a critic of China since 1980 and will continue until my death. They have tried to get me to come to China. They have offered me all expense paid trips to China. They have offered me a visa. They have offered me lecture fees. They have tried to compromise me. Now, if they try to compromise me, they'll try to compromise anybody. For many years, I held conferences on human rights in China, annual conferences. And I always invited members, representatives from the Falun Gong, because they are right there, first and foremost, among the groups who are being persecuted in China. I would invite China scholars to join me at these conferences. And more often than not, they would turn me down. And I don't want to mention names. They're famous names in the China scholarly community. But they would tell me, no, I want to keep my channels of communication open to China. I don't want to criticize the regime. So the Chinese Communist Party is very, very good at manipulating public opinion, at making sure that the people that it allows into China are hewing the party line and come back to spew party propaganda, or at least not say anything critical of communist China. Think about the fact that China is still allowed to purchase inserts into major American newspapers and run propaganda articles. I don't think we've been able to place, and our Voice of America hasn't been able to place an article in the People's Daily for I don't know how long. I mean, reciprocity, we shouldn't be allowing that. Think about the fact that radio stations here are owned or controlled by Communist Party interests. I was involved in 1998 in the Cox Commission, which investigated the effort of China in the late 1990s to set up espionage shops in the United States. And at that time, Chris Cox, who was the head of the Cox Commission, estimated that there were 10,000 Communist Party front organizations set up in the United States. That was 27 years ago. How many front organizations of various kinds do we have now? many more than 10,000. We are at war with China across all domains except the kinetic. People need to realize that. In cyberspace, we're at war with China. China just set up a network of phony cell stations in New York City that would have taken down the entire communication system in the largest city in the United States. That's an incredibly aggressive thing to do. It is, at one level, an act of war. China is at war with us across all domains, all the time. It is ceaseless. I think the solution has to be strict reciprocity. If China is engaged in actions against us, then we tell them, unless we are allowed to do the same thing in China, you must stop. Unless we're allowed to open up a George Washington Institute on the Beijing University campus, they have to close down all of the Confucius Institutes. Well, since they will never allow us to do that, then the Confucius Institutes will be closed down. But we didn't do it. They did it by refusing reciprocity, you see. Unless we're able to publish a newspaper in Shanghai and distribute it freely to the Chinese people, they can't publish their newspapers here. Unless we're allowed to own a radio station and broadcast news and information from our viewpoint, from the American viewpoint, they're not allowed to own radio stations here. And on, across the board. United Front measures. Remember, the United Front Department is a department of the Chinese Communist Party. It is a weapon that the Chinese Communist Party is using, along with propaganda and along with People's Liberation Army, in order to achieve world domination. And their path to world domination runs through one country, and one country alone. Only one country stands in the way of China's domination of the world, and that is the United States.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.